Vladimir Central, the tunnel that ended in a closet. Before we get into this madness, if you're the kind of person who loves unraveling the darkest, strangest true crime twists, hit that subscribe button. This story will crawl under your skin and stay there long after the screen goes dark. The alarms were already screaming when the guards stormed the east wing of Vladimir Central, one of Russia's oldest and most feared penal institutions. Heavy boots pounded the concrete as radios crackled with panic. It wasn't riots. It wasn't a fight. It was something worse. Something impossible. 2 inmates were missing from their bunks. At first, officers thought it was another error, another miscount. But when they reached cell 142, they froze. The sheet-covered bunk looked normal, until one guard yanked it aside and saw the gaping black hole beneath the lower mattress. A tunnel. A real one. Dug right through the cold concrete floor. The warden, a man known for never showing emotion, just whispered, "How in God's name?" The inmates who vanished were notorious for different reasons. Dmitry, the mole, Sokolov, a wiry, silent pickpocket who could slip through crowds like smoke. Yuri Antonov, a former construction worker serving time for armed robbery, strong enough to break apart a pallet with his bare hands. Nobody ever thought these two had anything in common. Nobody ever thought they'd be capable of planning something so elaborate or so desperate. The guards stood around the hole, confused. No one heard digging. No one saw tools. The concrete beneath that cell was supposed to be reinforced with metal mesh. And still there it was. A perfectly carved tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through, stretching into darkness. Investigators arrived within minutes. Flashlights cut through the dust as they dropped into the hole, crawling on elbows, scraping through the claustrophobic passageway. The air was stale. The walls were uneven but surprisingly smooth. Tiny tool marks lined the concrete, symbols of months, maybe years, of hidden work. But something felt off. The tunnel didn't angle outward the way most escape attempts did. Instead, it veered sideways, deeper into the prison. But as investigators crawled farther, they found strange signs, scraps of fabric tied like markers, a broken toothbrush handle sharpened at the end, small pieces of metal shaved into makeshift chisels. Every few feet, another symbol burned into the clay with a lighter. It was methodical, careful, almost disciplined. This wasn't a frantic escape attempt. This was planned, measured, obsessive. But then came the strange part. The tunnel suddenly widened, as if the men had expected to reach open ground. But instead, the investigators hit a wall. Not an exterior wall. A thin, flimsy interior barrier of plywood and plaster. It looked nothing like the concrete foundation they expected. One investigator pressed his ear to it. Silence. Another tapped it. Hollow. With a quick shove of his shoulder, the panel snapped open. A beam of flashlight sliced through the space beyond. The investigators squinted, expecting open air, an escape route, maybe even a hidden exit. They were staring into a cramped storage closet. Mop buckets. Old uniforms. A metal shelf stacked with expired cleaning supplies. A dead end. A nowhere. A room used by the guards themselves. One officer whispered, "They spent months digging just to break into this?" But the confusion didn't end there. Because the floor of the closet was covered in dust, and in that dust were footprints. Fresh ones. 2 sets. Leading to the door. The door that was locked from the outside. Meaning Dmitry and Yuri were inside that closet, but they never came out. And when investigators forced it open, what they found changed the entire direction of the case. The door groaned as the lock snapped, and the beam of a flashlight sliced into the cramped storage closet. Guards pressed forward, expecting to find 2 exhausted inmates curled in a corner. Instead, the room was empty. Dust floated in the air like drifting snow, disturbed only by the fresh footprints already fading into the concrete floor. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was a weight, thick and unnerving. Then someone muttered the question every guard was thinking. If the door was locked, how did they get out? The warden didn't answer. He simply scanned the walls with an expression that hinted at something deeper than frustration, fear. It wasn't fear of the escape. It was fear of what the escape meant within these walls. An investigative unit was brought in, 2 inspectors from the Ministry of Justice. Among them was Irina Markova, a sharp, relentless investigator with a reputation for unearthing corruption like a surgeon digging out embedded shrapnel. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She walked straight into the closet, crouched, and traced a boot print with her fingertip. 2 men. One stepped heavier than the other. They weren't running. They walked out calmly, she said, her voice cool. This wasn't a desperate escape. This was a planned movement. Coordinated. One of the guards stammered, "But it's impossible. This door only opens with a key. We checked the logs. No one unlocked it." Irina stood, brushing dust from her hands. "Then someone is lying," she said. "Or someone has a copy." That sentence cut through the room like a razor. Corruption rumors in Vladimir Central were old, but never proven. A guard helping inmates escape? That was treason. But a guard helping them disappear inside the prison? That was something darker, something with motive. The investigation quickly turned toward the prison staff. Schedules were pulled. Key access logs were checked. Camera footage was reviewed. But this section of the prison, ironically, had no cameras. Budget issues, they said. Or at least, that was the official answer. What they did find, however, was far more unsettling. A guard named Mikhail Petrov, assigned to that corridor, had left his shift 1 hour early, claiming sudden stomach pains. He hadn't shown up the next day. Or the next. When investigators tracked down his address, they found his apartment door ajar, his belongings untouched, his wallet on the table, and his uniform draped neatly on a chair. No signs of a struggle. No indication he packed a bag. Just absence, cold and abrupt. Meanwhile, back in the prison, Irina was piecing together the men's tunnel. She mapped its direction, noting every curve, every angle. Something caught her attention. The tunnel didn't point toward the outer walls. It pointed toward internal administrative areas, toward restricted zones, toward places inmates should never know the layout of. How did they know what was on the other side? Irina asked. No one answered. But someone did know. Guards had access to floor plans. Maintenance staff too. And Mikhail Petrov? He'd once worked maintenance before transferring to security. It was becoming clear the tunnel wasn't meant to lead outside. It was meant to lead to something, or someone, inside the prison. The theory hit Irina hard. This wasn't an escape attempt. This was a meeting point. But what kind of meeting required breaching a wall? One that couldn't happen in daylight. One that bypassed cameras. One that needed secrecy so extreme, the men dug a tunnel just to reach it. As Irina stood in the closet, examining a faint, oily stain on the floor, she felt something prick at her instincts, a detail everyone else missed. A detail that didn't belong in a storage room at all. A thin metal shaving. From a padlock. She lifted it to her flashlight. This lock wasn't opened with a key, she said quietly. It was cut from the inside. Silence crashed over the room. If the men had tools to cut the lock, then they didn't need the tunnel for escape. They needed it to avoid the eyes of whoever controlled the keys. Which meant the danger wasn't outside. It was inside the prison itself. And as Irina collected the final clue, an ID badge hidden behind a mop bucket, her pulse tightened. Because the name on the badge wasn't a guard's. It was the name of an inmate who had died 6 months earlier. An inmate whose death was officially ruled accidental. But the badge was recent. Freshly printed. And the photo wasn't the right face. Someone inside Vladimir Central was making identities. Moving people. Hiding them. And Dmitry and Yuri had just dug their way straight into the heart of it. Irina held the fake ID badge in her hand, feeling the weight of what it meant settle like ice in her stomach. Someone inside Vladimir Central had been fabricating identities, slipping inmates into restricted areas, moving them through the prison like ghosts. And now 2 men, Dmitry and Yuri, had tunneled into the one room that connected everything. But that raised a chilling question. If they had a way to move freely, why dig a tunnel at all? The answer clicked suddenly. They didn't dig to escape. They dug to avoid being seen entering the closet. Whoever ran this operation, whoever controlled the keys, cameras and access points, they were dangerous, powerful, and watching. Irina pocketed the badge and moved fast. She headed to the administrative building, weaving through corridors lined with metal doors. Her steps echoed in the silence. The deeper she went, the more she felt the air shift, colder, heavier. The prison had its own heartbeat, and she was moving toward it. She reached the records office, a dim room stacked with old logbooks and outdated computer terminals. As she scanned the archives, she noticed something odd. Over the past 3 years, at least 9 inmates had been quietly transferred to special work assignments, yet no documentation explained what those assignments were. Even more troubling, 3 of those inmates were officially listed as dead. Irina leaned back, eyes narrowing. Someone had been erasing people, or repurposing them. A name kept resurfacing. Major Alexei Voronov, head of internal operations. A man with a spotless record and a reputation for handling problems discreetly. Too discreetly. Irina knew what she had to do next. She requested entry into Voronov's restricted wing, claiming she needed surveillance backups. 2 guards escorted her. The hallway leading to his office was unervingly clean. Fresh paint. New light fixtures. A contrast to the rest of the decaying prison. They stopped at his door. One guard knocked. Major, Investigator Markova requests. A sound cut him off. A dull thud from inside. Followed by silence. Irina's pulse jumped. She signaled the guards. Open it. Now. They hesitated, but only for a moment. The door crashed inward. Inside, the room was empty. Completely empty. Not in the sense of someone missing, empty in the sense of scrubbed. No papers. No computer. No files. Not even dust on the shelves. Just one thing left behind. A chair, lying on its side. And beneath it, a trail of dust leading to a vent grate that had been removed. Someone had crawled through. Recently. Irina crouched, shining her flashlight into the vent. A faint echo drifted out. A clang. A distant shout. A door slamming. Voronov was on the move, and he was using the same hidden pathways the inmates had used. She stood abruptly. He's headed to sublevel access. He's trying to reach them before we do. Before the guards could react, Irina was already running down the hall. The prison seemed to shift around her, lights flickering, doors buzzing open, officers scrambling to respond to her orders. Down one flight of stairs, then another, the air growing colder and danker with each level. When she reached the basement, a labyrinth of old pipes and unused service tunnels, she heard voices. 2 men. Breathing hard. Dmitri and Yuri. And another voice. Confident. Voronov. Irina followed the sound until she reached an old maintenance junction. She peered around the corner. The 2 escapees stood against the wall, chests heaving, covered in dirt. Voronov stood before them holding something small, too small to be a weapon. An ID badge printer. Portable. He wasn't arresting them. He was giving them new identities. Irina stepped out, gun drawn. Major Voronov. Hands up. He smiled. Investigator Markova. You're late. The men froze. The room vibrated with tension. Voronov lifted the badge printer slowly. You think they were escaping this prison? They were escaping a death sentence the moment they learned something they shouldn't have. Irina kept her aim steady. What did they learn? Voronov's smile widened. That Vladimir Central doesn't bury its secrets. It recycles them. Then he dropped the printer. A metallic click echoed. A timer beeped. Her eyes widened. Explosive. Improvised. Small but enough to collapse the junction. Run, she shouted. The world erupted in dust and concrete. Pipes burst.